All right, we're back again with a long time absence of our regular live stream shows, and I apologize to anybody who is feeling like they're late to this broadcast today, or it feels like I got started before you were ready. Largely, that is entirely my fault. I did a thumbnail that said 6:30 start, and then when I set it up, I set it for 6, so I'm usually going to start at the earlier time. And again, this looks different than a regular live stream. The biggest difference today, and I'm trying out something a little different, not so much because it's better, but it's because it's what I have to work with right now. But when you go to ask the questions and you go to enter in your questions, whether that's down below in your screen or the side, depending on if you are watching this on a computer or a phone, I'm not going to be able to post the screen and the image normally when I would answer questions on my regular live streams, you'd be able to see the question I'm trying to answer. I'm not going to be able to do that, so instead I have a computer right next to me that I'll be looking at to pull up the questions as you post them up. And I'll do my best to answer those questions as I get started here. So I know it's been a little while. I'm going to try to get back into a regular routine on the live stream, at least a weekly live stream starting next week. And I'm presuming that I'm going to be back to a regular Tuesday schedule. At least that's kind of the plan right now. But for now, I just wanted to do a quick one here just to work out the technology setup that I have right now. And hopefully this will work for you on being able to answer your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. No guarantees you're going to like my answer, but I will do my best. If you've noticed, this has been kind of the look and format that we've been using for some of the videos recently. And I don't know how, I'm going to probably be mixing it up a little bit, but you'll see some videos that look like this, some that look like maybe some other layouts. I'm really trying to increase the volume of videos that we are doing here at We the Govern, mainly because, honestly, I have so many stories, I'm barely getting to probably 10% of them. And if I can improve my output of videos, then I can improve the number of stories that you get out there. And a lot of these stories need to be told because there's no way you'll ever read about any of this stuff in the traditional media. Now, going back to something I'd promised years ago, I think it's a year and a half ago now, when I started doing these live streams, many people were asking me to just provide a quick little outline in the beginning of events and activities that I have coming up. And so just in the next month, the next series of events, I think I've got 7 of them on the calendar right now, and this would be an opportunity if you happen to live near one of these events and you want to actually come meet me in person, invite you to be there. And the first one's going to be September 27th, which is actually the Saturday. This is a presentation to the 17th Legislative Republicans in Washougal. They're doing a fundraiser there, and they asked me to come and make a presentation. So if you happen to be going there, or you're in the Vancouver, Clark County area, that's an opportunity. If you want to just come meet me, come to that event. You'll see me there speak, and I'm usually pretty open and able to talk to people who want to come up and chat about things. Also, the next thing I think I have on my schedule is October 2nd, which I believe is a Thursday. I'm doing a breakfast event really early. It starts at 7:30 up in Edmonds. And I can't remember the name of the group. Sorry if you organize that with me. I just noticed it on my calendar. I wrote down. But I will be there, and I will be speaking. And I think that's just a basic presentation about Let's Go Washington, or probably we'll be talking about the Let's Go Washington stuff, but mainly the We the Governed and what I'm doing with fraud investigations and other things in Washington State. October 9th, which is coming up the following week, I'll be doing a presentation to the 30th Legislative District Republicans up in Federal Way. And I think that's at the regular meeting. I didn't write down the exact location in Federal Way, but if you look up the 30th Leg District Republicans and you live in that area, it's probably going to be fairly close to you. October 11th, which I know is a Saturday, so this is the 9th, is a Thursday. And that's in the evening. It'll be after work. On October 11th, which is that Saturday, I will be at the Jefferson County Oktoberfest, which the Republicans are hosting out there. Usually they do that at it's like a scout cabin that's located not far outside of Port Townsend. I know I've spoken there a number of times, and I've spoken at this event there before. So if you're interested in going to the Jefferson County Republicans Oktoberfest, I am on their schedule right now, and I look forward to seeing you there. It's always a good event. October 15th will be my next official DOGE Washington training class, and that one's actually going to be downtown Seattle in Fremont. That's going to be at the Republican headquarters, the King County Republican headquarters there. If I remember right, that office is relatively limited. I think we can get maybe 40 or 50 people in that facility for a DOGE Washington training. And I've been told that if they max out, they'll just kind of keep hosting them there, and I'll keep coming up and doing training until we run out of people who are interested in learning about how to dig up fraud in government, which hopefully never happens. The next day, October 16th, I'll be in Kent at a DOGE Washington training event, and that'll be at the 47th Ledge District Republicans meeting. It'll be a little bit tighter one because they're really just doing an organized event first, and then I'm speaking right afterwards. And so, but again, like I always say at these DOGE Washington training classes, I'll stay around if you have questions or you want to talk to me in person. I usually do that all the time. And then on October 29th, I have a DOGE Washington training class out in Burien. That is, the date's locked in, but the location isn't. There's a bunch more activities that are already on the calendar past that, but I'm just going to give you the next month worth of activities. And on the DOGE Washington training classes, some of these just kind of got lined up in the last, we verified some of the locations and details today. So I haven't updated the website as of this live stream, but I'll try to do it the next day or so and get all that information there. So you can look at the WeTheGovern.com website, and you can actually see on the article posts, and I'll outline a couple more. We just finished about 3 DOGE Washington training classes. One was out in Grays Harbor, one was in Bonnie Lake, and one was in Vancouver. And Bonnie Lake and Vancouver, I think we're going to probably go back and do some more sometime soon. And if you live in Bellingham and in Spokane, I think we're likely to be going out and doing some more out in those locations as well. And Ellensburg, I just don't think we've got the date picked out yet for a couple of those events. Real quick, just as a teaser, follow-up on the title of this live stream. In case you haven't heard, as of today, the Department of Justice did announce lawsuits against 6 additional states. If you've been following some of the videos I've done on the channel and talking about voter integrity issues and the fact that many of the states don't want to cooperate with the feds in potentially reviewing their voter rolls for non-U.S. citizens and illegal people who shouldn't be registered to vote being on the voter rolls. And so they've already sued last week. I think it was last week they had sued Maine and Oregon for refusing to cooperate. And by the way, this law, I mean, this really goes back to the 1960s. The 1965 Voter Rights Act and some of the previous laws that kind of built up on it. These laws were passed in response to the Jim Crow Democrats of the South, who were falsifying and doing all kinds of shenanigans with their voter rolls down there. And so the Republicans at the time were forced to intervene with the Department of Justice. You know, this is long before I was born. And so this law has been on the books for a long time. They haven't used it in Washington State before, but they had also had ignored, I think, a lot of the other states. But with all the problems that have been gradually exposed now, especially in the last 5 years or so with the voting rolls, especially in states dumb enough like Washington to go down the all mail-in voting type system, the screwed up voter rolls that we have are inevitably going to invite a deeper dive and investigation. I've done plenty of videos on the topic, so I don't want to necessarily repeat that. I'm just letting you know that we are up to 8 states in the last 2 weeks that have been sued by the Department of Justice. They do appear to be going methodically down the list, and they, as each state refuses to provide the rolls, and Washington State just refused on Monday with a news story about it on Tuesday of this week. It is Thursday right now, so we're 2 days into this. My guess is that the Department of Justice sues Washington State either next week or maybe the week after. That would be my guess. They'll probably be just kind of sequentially organizing these litigations. Just for those who are curious, and I just made a list of the states that they just sued today: California, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. Those are all going to court. And the only one on that list actually that does surprise me a little bit is New Hampshire, but that's mostly because I'm kind of ignorant about the setup that state had with their voter roll management and whoever the equivalent of their Secretary of State is there. I was familiar with the obvious, egregious mess of a voting system that California has, and Michigan and Minnesota. I was familiar with New York in particular, and New York has the lawsuit right now. The Department of Justice is going after them for the driver's licenses to illegals, which is a similar problem to what we have in Washington State. And that was the initial lawsuit that they filed that I think made Washington State Department of Licensing panic a little bit. And so we probably in Washington have a multitude of reasons for the Department Department of Justice to come in and investigate and file lawsuits against us. And of course, Steve Hobbs, the Secretary of State, decided to go full dark mode. He's putting up what's considered like the public-facing list, but he's not actually giving them any of the identifiers in the voter rolls. There's a lot to uncover here. Hopefully the Department of Justice gets to us pretty quickly. But it does look like they're, with Harmeet Dillon taking point in the Civil Rights Division, that this thing's going to keep rolling down, and it does seem like we're going to be in that list pretty soon. You know, part of the thing is some of these other states, especially New York, California, and really I think Michigan, these are fairly, and Pennsylvania really, these are big states with larger populations and much more complex and capable legal systems. You know, they're going to be fighting the feds tooth and nail all the way in the court. Compared to them, I mean, these are the 800-pound gorillas that the DOJ is coming after. Washington State's like a little pipsqueak group along the way. Bob Ferguson probably thinks he's an important guy, and Nick Brown's obviously, beyond just being a contestant on Survivor, who wants to sue over bikini barista issues. This isn't exactly the A squad out here that the DOJ is worried about. So they'll be throwing in, I mean, we'll get lumped into one of these lawsuits coming up soon. We just have a dumb enough crew running our government that we're floundering into it with even less competency than some of these other states have. So we'll see what happens, but I would say that that litigation's inevitable, and we'll see what they get to uncover. You know, just in case, and then again, if you do have any questions, feel free to put those down below. I can't post them on the screen as I go to answer them, so I'll jump on just a couple that started, and then I'll get back to talking about this issue real quick. Actually, these aren't really questions. Well, here's a question. Here's a question from Trisha. Will they ever get to us? Which I think I kind of just answered, but the answer is yes. I think the Department of Justice is almost certainly going to get to us. And I was a little skeptical that they would maybe a few months ago. I was a little nervous that they just had their hands full, but they seem to have prioritized trying to address some of these issues sooner rather than later. And I also believe, sort of related to this, is the Antifa, putting Antifa as like a terrorist organization, and the violence that the Antifa crowd always has and always uses to target everybody that they disagree with. That seems to probably be drawing more and more attention to the Pacific Northwest. Since Antifa is largely, at least the American branch of it, seems to be headquartered out of Portland, with Rose City Antifa being kind of the oldest one that's officially out there. And they experimented and practiced on most of their violent street techniques here in Seattle and Portland. I would anticipate that the Department of Justice is probably going to be shifting a little bit more on the resource side into Washington State. Also, because we've also become a primary conduit for the Sinaloa drug cartel and everybody else, to basically, now the southern border has been largely closed off, they're bringing a lot more of the drugs down through Canada. And so we're a primary transit point for that. So inevitably, the part of the Department of Justice that focuses on criminal activity is going to be focused on digging into exactly what the heck's going on there. So there's a lot of stuff going on related to this as well. None of it is good news for the Democrats in charge of Washington State right now. And mostly when I say that, generally, one of the things that they're most concerned about, of course, is where's their money. They want to extract, because it's a very parasitical organization. The way Washington State government's been set up, especially for the last 40 years or so, is just like a group of parasites. The bigger and more bloated they get, every promise they make is always a lie. It never comes through, and they always want to extract more and more cash. But eventually, as Margaret Thatcher so famously said, you do run out of other people's money. We have run out of money for Washington State. The Lafleur curve's essentially been hit with the recent tax increase, and so they think they're going to get their $9 billion in taxes, and yet already the OFM report that's come out with budget forecasts just early this week, clearly indicates we're going to be about $1 billion short, even from the already significant shortfall that had been identified right after the session closed. What that means is there's just not that many tax dollars they have that they can get. Their projections are wrong, and the budget incompetence and stupidity of the people running the state is wasting and squandering far more money than they were thinking in several different departments. And so because of it, they're hitting the wall. There's no more money to grab. And in fact, it seems reasonably likely that they're going to call a special session and bring the legislature in to deal with the fact that when the money actually gets to below a certain level, constitutionally, the governor's forced to actually call a special session. Now, they've got a lot of deceptive people working in OFM, so they could probably lie and pretend like the budget's not quite as bad as it really is. And I suspect that's actually what they're doing, because I think it's a lot worse than what they're representing right now. But nevertheless, they're still hitting this kind of wall where at some point they're going to end up having to make some hard choices at some point in time. Now, because of the crew that's in charge right now, you can never count on them making rational or even intelligent decisions on what gets cut first. So they'll probably try to see if they can cut public safety first. It's usually their highest priority. The last thing they want to cut is their DEI programs or other wasteful, places where they're just wasting billions and millions of dollars. So that's where DOGE Washington comes in. We're going to be digging into some elements of their budget that even a kindergartner could recognize would be a wiser cut first before they cut something that actually matters. You have, another example would be like, of course, Sound Transit running off the rails with their delusional, miracle imagining approach to how to identify maybe not quite as bad as the California road train to nowhere, but a close second, and I think they're more inspired by the waste of cash that California demonstrated with that disaster of a public project. And Sound Transit seems bound and determined to be the next biggest public transit disaster in America, and they're really striving hard to do their best to get there. TriMet down in California, or Oregon, is about the same. There is a fight at our border because Washington doesn't want to get caught up in covering any of the costs of the inevitably collapsing TriMet public train system. And so the taxpayers of Washington shouldn't be on the hook for that, which is why you see a huge fight going on over the dumb bridge design that's currently on the books for the Columbia River down there. We need a new bridge, but we sure don't need the dumb people that are running that. And they're really horrific designs and bad approach to public policy that inevitably seems to come along with that. And let's go down here to another question. Jason Fisher, long time no hear from you, so sorry about not having a live stream for so long, but we'll get back and answering more questions. And your question is, what's your thoughts on Seattle area businesses, or I'm assuming you're talking about one, a Seattle area business fined $1 million from COVID era fines. And yes, I am familiar. Actually, there's a couple of them. The one that I'm aware of is the Stuffy's restaurant, which actually isn't in the Seattle area. It's down in Longview, if I remember right. And that is an absurd and ridiculous fine for policies that in hindsight everybody realizes are delusional, insane, and ridiculous and absurd and over the top, and had no basis in science or reality, other than just demonstrating the flex of the Department L&I essentially at the time. And I did a story about this early on years ago when they originally were saying this is absurd and ridiculous, the rules. And the restaurant owners were right. The state was wrong. Everybody had realizes the state is wrong, but the state just wants to keep imposing the fine on this one business. Now, they've dropped them for a lot of the people that they were coming after for a while, or they worked out quick and quiet settlements in many cases, or the businesses just went under. And so a lot of that stuff's kind of passed into distant memory. And this is an interesting one, an important one to look at, because if Stuffy's can prevail in this litigation, it will, I think, be a good thing to set the stage for preventing the state from being so abusive and destructive in the future. It takes a high level of incompetence, which Washington State has an endless supply of in government, to create absurd scenarios that draw the attention from a national level on just what not to do when you're running government. And Washington State, the Democrats in particular, seem just highly desirous of becoming the national example of what not to do when you're running local government. And no matter how much you point it out to them or rationally point out the absurdity of their policies, and no matter how much it's obviously failing in front of their eyes, they seem determined to A, protect the narrative that says that they're doing a great job, and then B, hide it from everybody. And then, of course, C, they certainly don't want to change. And so this combination of narrative protection and corruption and kickbacks to your friends and creating these grant grifting operations and all this stuff, it is not going to produce, I think, the results that many of these guys, I don't know, many of them think that they're going to get, I guess. So we'll see. Here's another quick comment right here. This is Jeff John in 98. No idea the significance there, but the question, it's not really a question, but it's a comment, and I thought I would just mention this one here. You're saying, he says, voter rolls are just the beginning. Wait until what comes next. Oh, man, guys, when you're writing these questions, make sure they're full sentences. But I'm assuming wait until you see what comes next is what you meant there. And that's a great question. I mean, it's not really a question, but it's a great comment in the sense that it does seem likely that the investigation to the Washington State voter rolls by itself is going to logically lead to exposure of a number of other things. I'm going to give away a couple stories that I have coming out here that I'm going to record and then launch over the next couple days. One of them is about the number of non-U.S. citizens that are on the Apple Health plans in Washington State. And every one of those, supposedly people will say, well, we're bringing in immigration to help us with the economy. It isn't helpful at all if you're bringing in immigrants that immediately have to go on state subsidies across the board, which is what our state did, just like every other state. California, Oregon, Illinois, Florida, all these other states brought in all these illegals, and then and the feds pushed them into a lot of red states. Don't pretend like this is just a blue state thing. This, unfortunately, is a red state issue problem as well. But, of course, in Washington, because we have exceptionally bad people who are running government, they've willfully decided they're going to openly break, of course, any kind of immigration laws that might exist. And they're happy to make sure that they use your tax dollars to subsidize people that are not productive members of society, but they actually come here and they're parasitically just taking from the taxpayers of Washington to subsidize their lives here. We don't need more people in our community like that. We have plenty of homegrown people that don't have jobs or can't afford health care, and plus we've done a lot of things to screw up the system in our state and elsewhere. And there's a national problem on this too, where people are struggling, and we have enough of our own people that we need to take care of. We don't need to import millions of people from overseas to also take care of them because they can't take care of themselves, or they're unwilling to, or they're just gaming the system to steal money. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. That identifies a large, especially when you have a massive deficit like we do in our state right now already, subsidizing people that shouldn't be here at all in the first place is not a good use of your taxpayer dollars, even for Democrats, as much as they think that they're going to get their votes. But the voting investigation is inevitably going to carry over into exposing the non-U.S. citizens that are on Washington State's Apple Health Plan, as well as the SNAP benefits, which is the equivalent of like food stamps. And so this is going on right now as we speak. And so when you're talking about the voting rolls, cleaning them up or digging into those issues, it ripples into a number of these other agencies and departments. It exposes the Department of Licensing corruption as it relates to how they're taking non-U.S. citizens and giving them driver's licenses and commercial driver's licenses, as we've recently discovered, and how they're fast-tracking them through, even when they can't speak English, read it, or even know what's going on, giving them all of these licenses in general. We're probably going to discover that there's a decent number of non-U.S. citizens that have been making campaign finance contributions. I don't know how many. We'll find out when those lists start to become more public. And I do plan on filing campaign finance complaints in those so that the people who actually make the donations that are not U.S. citizens under the RCW 4217A, they don't actually get fined themselves, but whoever took the money has to return it. And so that'll probably be fun for the people who took that cash. But we'll have to see where that goes. And I think there's a lot more to this than people realize. It is more than the voter rolls. But the voter rolls are the easiest place to start, mostly because there's such a clear and unambiguous nexus for the feds to make sure that your voting practices are not discriminating or silencing people's civil rights through dilution of your vote, which is just as significant an attack on the rights of people to vote than anything else. Or, of course, falsifying the votes, all the other problems. Mail-in voting, of course, introduces a whole new category of deception that you can easily use since there's no chain of custody on the ballots. Nobody has a clue who actually filled them out, got them, or whether they were filled out at all by the people that are supposedly listed there. They don't even know if they're real people. Nobody knows anything. And when we've done the doorbelling over the years, and those of you who have helped out on this, trust me, that work was valuable. Clearly identifies that there are thousands and tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of very questionable, problematic voter roll records that do need to be cleaned up and purged. The unknowns, of course, are exactly how many. And exactly, number one will be how many, and then how many actually have voted in the past, which would give you a better sense of problems with historic voting results. But first, let's just start to clean it up right now, and inevitably that creates this domino effect into a lot of other areas. Let's see, there's a question here by Jason Fisher. I kind of skipped over this, but I'll go back to it. Seattle, what's your thoughts on the Seattle City suing Glock? And is this the last throes of a fake rhino Republican? Yeah, I mean, Ann Davidson is the attorney for Seattle, and obviously she was the only sane option probably in the last decade who actually ran for attorney in the city of Seattle. The person that she defeated was a total loon, and so she was better. She actually believes that there is such a thing as criminals that need to be prosecuted, which made her incredibly rare among the political glitterati that run that city into the ground. And unfortunately, and this is one thing that sometimes happens to people in these positions, is they also get cajoled into doing dumb lawsuits like this one, which is entirely a waste. She also had a Trump lawsuit that was stupid and silly. And wasteful, but obviously she's getting a lot of pressure, and she has another loon running against her this cycle, and this isn't going to help her. This stupid lawsuit against Glock. Nobody who cares about trying to take away everybody's ability to defend themselves from criminals is actually going to be impressed that you sued Glock. They'll still vote for the crazy loon that's running against you, so you don't gain anything politically from doing this, and you clearly do lose a bit of your integrity by wasting the taxpayer dollars on stupid lawsuits like this. However, that's what's happened. If I lived in Seattle, I'd still vote for her over the clown and the crazy person running against her, but it is very sad to see what she's doing in this case, because it's a wasted distraction. Beyond the fact that they'll lose the case, it's just a waste when they have other things that are really significant issues and we have to deal with them. Let's see, there's a question here from Pam. Have you heard anything on possible issues related to Washington State possibly creating issues on the retirement pensions due to some kind of mismanagement? Yes, I have. And in fact, there's a couple articles. The Center Square, I think, had a really good article on this, I want to say last week. And what they're really talking about is pensions are a big cost of the state government. Washington State hasn't gone down the road that places like Illinois, New York, and California have gone down, where they've created an unsustainable and completely impossible situation down the road that if you're going to actually fulfill the pensions, the state goes bankrupt. Generally, compared to those other states, Washington's actually generally been pretty good. But over the last few years, they've started to get quite sloppy with how they calculate the amount of money they need to set aside to help fulfill the pension obligations for public sector workers. And because of that, you start to create this inevitable gap in reality in the future, because nobody being a politician, likes to reduce how much money they can go ahead and waste today. So they'd rather squander tax dollars today on flim-flam garbage projects or whatever they're going to do with it, but at least they get the immediate political goodwill feedback from those operations. And it's always easier to steal from future pensions, because by the time that's a problem, you're long gone. So that's like the tendency, the kicking the can down the road that our politicians have. And they've started to do that now. And so what that is doing is it is putting the future pensions at risk. Obviously, one of the issues here, right, if you want to solve that problem, is, of course, downsize the state, which is an inevitable outcome that does happen when you start to run out of other people's money and socialism begins to fail, as it always does. regardless of whether you're doing that under another name, incompetent and corrupt government that's bloated and beyond recognition just needs to be downsized. Washington State could really benefit from firing about 50,000 state workers. Now, who you fire matters and which agencies you downsize the most, because there are necessary job tasks and things that have to be done in certain parts of state government, but a lot of it's actually wasted and wasteful and unnecessary. And inevitably, when the corruption people start to fall out of favor, and there are sane people that are put into office to clean up the mess that they've created, I don't think there's any other option other than cutting and downsizing the state, which inevitably, when you do that, you also substantially reduce that pension liability and the requirement that you have moving forward. There's a question here from Brian B. It looks like the initiative collectors are facing a lot of harassment. Yes, they are. I've done posted up, I think, if you go look at haywire.org on that website, you'll see like a whole bunch of these articles there. And Jason Rance has been covering it. Brandy Cruz has been covering it. I think Senator Square will be covering it. Ari Hoffman, when he gets back from vacation, is inevitably going to be covering it. The Antifa is threatening the people who are out there gathering signatures. There's a lot of signature free speech suppression that's going on with them screaming and yelling. And in Bonnie Lake, they were stealing initiative sheets and threatening the signature gatherers. And of course, that's what the left does. That's what they always do. It's the only thing they have left, apparently. And so it's really going to be interesting to see where that goes. Get out there and sign those petitions. And I've heard the Let's Go Washington people talk about the fact that they're mailing these out to a lot of people, and that's really important. If you get that in the mail, don't just have you and your spouse sign it. If you're the only two people you know in the state, go ahead and send it back. But if you get that in the mail, get it filled up with 20 of your friends, coworkers, whoever, and then send back the completed sheet with all 20 spaces filled up with valid Washington State voters who have signed. And I think it's important because that's going to greatly reduce their costs, and considering how much some of the paid signature gatherers are being harassed out there and some of the volunteer signature gatherers and how violent the left is, inevitably, this is the time to help make that process a little bit easier. So, Sean, the artist formerly known as John Cusack. Washington, here's a question. Washington is better off right now than Oregon. At least you have a governor who isn't hiding in her beach house every day. She is too scared to tweet. You're talking about Tina Kotek down there in Oregon. Listen, I don't know. Obviously, we do seem to be in a competition between a number of Democrat-run states to see who can have the most incompetent, clownish governor out there. You got Newsom out of California, Kotek out of Oregon, Ferguson out of Washington State. Ferguson's always kind of put himself as a little mini-me to Newsom, so he's always been a bit player on the stage. Despite his ego thinking that he can somehow end up in the White House, that seems highly unlikely. But he could run for office the same way that Inslee did and become a national mocking joke. And perhaps maybe he thinks he's going to try that in 2028. I don't know. But you also have the Colorado governor. You have the New York governor. You have the Illinois governor. You just have clowns. And there's a lot of clowns out there trying to demonstrate who can be the most incompetent and pathetic. And we'll see. That's not really the competition that I'd prefer our state to be in, but it could happen to better crew of people. We'll see how it goes. Jason, got another question from you again here. This is, what's your thoughts on Evergreen Camas? Okay. On the Evergreen Camas and Vancouver Public Schools all striking at the same time, and was this connected? So for those who don't know, there was a strike. It's over now, but it lasted for several weeks in the beginning of school. And in fact, I drove by some of the people that were striking when I came down to Vancouver to do some of my video work. And it was a big circus show on the side. The WEA was getting them all organized. And the SEIU, I think, for some of the other subunits. And they're out there protesting, jacking up the cost of education for the local taxpayers. Even though it's illegal for teachers to strike, they still do it anyway because in our state, they certainly don't enforce the law against the unions, particularly since the unions essentially own the Democrat Party and they own the judges. So there's no way that either of those entities are ever going to enforce the law anyway. But I think that it's very important to know that this is kind of a test case that the teachers unions are using so that when the law, I think, goes into effect in January, where they don't even get, where the state has agreed to allow unemployment benefits to striking workers for a certain length of time. I'm blanking now on the amount of time that they finally decided on, because I remember it was originally a bigger number and they've dropped it down. But nevertheless, that creates an incentive for more strikes. And in our state, where that really matters is on the public sector side of things. And so that's not good, and this is the kind of thing that's happening. And it did look like it was coordinated, but the WA, they can openly coordinate strikes if they want. I would just recommend that if you live in those districts, don't vote for a levy ever again. It's probably a foolish decision, and never vote for a bond. These are poorly run districts, run even worse as time goes by. Dale Davis, you're doing God's work over there. And my little sister and family live there. I'm assuming you mean Washington State. And she didn't know about your show, and I sent her a link. Well, thank you so much for doing that. Not a question, Dale, but I do appreciate the support. It's always better to have more people out there seeing the show. I don't expect a lot of people to be watching this particular live stream live, although it looks like there's over 105 that are online right now. But mainly, I guess we've had about 500 people coming in at some point in time in this live stream so far, which is kind of surprising because I had no warning to any of you that I was going to do this, and this is not the day I would normally do a live stream, historically anyway, but I figured I'd test this out. So thanks for jumping on, and thanks for sharing the link with your sister. Let's see. Joe McCarthy, do they sue Snap-on if a tool is used in a crime, or Stanley, Craftsman, etc.? Lawyers, yeah, this is funny. And of course, that has having to do with the Glock lawsuit out of Seattle. No, I mean, guns are different because they always want to ban the gun. The only thing, obviously, the left doesn't want people to have the ability to defend themselves and protect themselves from criminals. They certainly don't want you to have the ability to protect yourself at all, really. And so firearms are a great threat to their objective of making life as unsafe as possible, so they can let you cower in fear, and that allows them to bloat up the administrative state even bigger. And so they certainly don't want you to have that independence and ability to defend yourself, because that would actually work to help reduce crime. And so it's just simply an excuse and a cash extraction scheme. Thank God for the Second Amendment, and more importantly, for the people who are actually willing to defend it and keep fighting for it going forward. Hopefully that's you and your neighbors. We have to protect it. That was kind of my original issue that really got me involved in politics back when I was in college. It was the first thing I did when I took over the College Republicans at Columbia, was to bring the NRA to campus. And some of my first articles I ever wrote about had to deal with Second Amendment issues back in the day, so long ago. Jason Fisher, what are your thoughts on the West Coast wall of vaccines by the governors? I'm waiting for Sideshow Bob to start dancing the Stephen Colbert vaccine song skit. Yeah, obviously, there's a lot of groupthink that's going on right now. I think there's fractures in this alliance that are already appearing. The initial step is relatively more about virtue signaling than any kind of activity, but it's still something that you want to roll back when we get the opportunity. We are going to have to bounce some people out of office, and obviously fixing the voter rolls isn't a bad first step in that direction. Let's see. Charlie Foxtrot, question. How is the KC sheriff, I'm assuming you mean King County sheriff, able to refuse to book arrestees given Seattle pays for those beds? Well, you're presuming that the unelected, because it was an elected position, so the sheriff's not elected in King County right now, which means they are corrupt from the beginning because they're politically influenced in how they're actually going to do things, and they're not very responsive to what the people who actually live in the community who are voting for them actually want. They report to the executive director in King County, and that's because out of the 39 counties in Washington State, about that's funny, I should just know off the top of my head. I think it's 7 or 8 counties decided to go down the home rule charter loophole, which was put into the state constitution back in 1949. And King County was actually the first county that went down that road. I want to say 1969 is they were the first ones to go down there. And I think I'm right in remembering those dates. But either way, King County, Snohomish, Pierce, Whatcom, Clark, Clallam, and San Juan County. So maybe it's only 7 that went down that road. And Clallam County was a little different, the way that they set up their home rule charter. But what it does is it changes it from the commission structure of county governance to this home rule charter county, which allows you to take certain constitutionally elected local government positions and make them so they can be appointed or slightly different structure. So originally when King County did this, they made the sheriff not an elected position. They made an appointed position. And that didn't last long. People didn't like it, so they changed it to an elected position, which they did back in the I want to say late 80s. So they went with this unelected sheriff for 20 years, didn't work out so well. Then they went with an elected sheriff, which is when Dave Reichert was actually made sheriff, an elected sheriff of King County back in the day. And then recently, a couple years ago, in the new charter review process, they put it back to being an unelected position. So essentially what that means is the King County Sheriff does whatever the executive director tells him to do for King County. The executive directors in King County have been horrific people, terrible people to ever have in any kind of form of government at all. And so inevitably they're probably telling the sheriff, hey, listen, if they didn't kill anybody the first time, let's put them back on the street until they do. So the sheriff seems to be going along with that. That's very demoralizing, by the way, for people in law enforcement that actually care about keeping the public safe. If they can keep arresting the same guy 40, 50, 70 times and nothing really happens to him, and every time you're arresting them, they're creating new victims in the community. And I'm pretty frustrated and angry about that. Inevitably, that's the kind of thing that does lead to political change, as it has even in our state in the past. Essentially, that was one of the main issues that drove the 1994 election in Washington State, when you saw this huge turnover of what had been a majority Democrat representation in congressional races and also in the state legislature, and it flipped completely. And that is really what we're seeing change right now. I think this is permeating into the population as they're realizing that one political class, and it's exclusively Democrats right now, they don't seem to care about violent crime, and they want to either modify the stats, make it seem like it's not so bad, and they will do anything and everything they can to release those violent criminals back out on the street. We obviously saw this in the train killing murder that occurred out in, North Carolina? Yeah, it was North Carolina. Anyway, you're seeing these stories, and they're happening here for some as well. Here's a comment, more than anything else. Sean the artist, formerly known as John Cusack, again, which is an incredibly long name there. Bankruptcy could be an option for some states, assuming that's constitutional. Yeah, and this is a question. Obviously the federal government doesn't officially go bankrupt because they're printing money. So that allows them to, they do other things instead. They destroy the value of the currency. Inflation is essentially a tax by another name, and probably one of the worst types of taxes you can create. And states don't have the ability to print their own currency. So states can go bankrupt, essentially. They don't have a formal structure in bankruptcy law that they would go through, but essentially they'd be reorganizing whatever's left of their debt. Washington State's actually quite a long ways from that, with a substantial amount of assets. And this is something I think a lot of people who haven't really paid attention to the structure, particularly of western states versus eastern states. You can almost divide it by the Mississippi River. States to the east of the Mississippi River didn't set aside a lot of public lands that were managed for their states. States west of the Mississippi River generally, most of them, especially the ones out on the far west, so Nevada, Utah, the Dakotas, Montana, Washington, Idaho, all these other states, originally they set aside a large amount of unpopulated public land to fund schools largely. That was originally the theory behind it. And so in Washington State, I believe we're at about 30% of our total land mass is actually set aside and owned by the state or the feds, but a good chunk of it's by the state. And the practical reality is that this becomes a revenue source for the state. Timber sales on DNR land, agricultural leases on DNR land in eastern Washington mostly, shellfish leases, and leases for marinas that are on public shellfish lands, things like that. And so Washington State has a substantial amount of hard, practical assets that are massive and very valuable, more valuable than whatever debt I think these guys even have the ability to cough up in the next 10 years. So the bankruptcy, it's hard to know what that really means. More likely what you have is a level of downsizing. Inevitably, at some point in time, you make some pretty radical changes to how the state's structured. You eliminate agencies, you fire employees, you end programs, and you restructure. And that's probably, so you're probably a lot closer to more like a Chapter 10 or Chapter 13 type of bankruptcy, probably in Washington State. There's no such thing as like a Chapter 7 where you just dissolve everything and it's all gone. The question is who the debt is owed to. I think vendors get screwed. Former employees, their pensions get screwed. You know, a lot of people will lose in that kind of a situation. Interestingly enough, there was some question a couple years ago. One of the small counties in Washington State, about 15 years ago, they thought they were going to go bankrupt officially. And what happens when a local jurisdiction goes bankrupt? Well, technically, if a county goes bankrupt, the state has to step in and take over the financial situation and kind of reorg and turn that county around. Related to that, if you're a county and there's a city in your county that goes bankrupt, essentially the county has to step in and take over and do whatever restructuring financially has to happen. And this is very similar to what you see happening with the school districts, because essentially school districts are tied into the state Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, so OSPI. They're financially kind of this oversight of those school districts. And so recently, 10% of all the school districts in Washington State are requiring their financial situation is so bad through sheer total incompetence, and again, and just corruption at the local level, like Bellevue and Marysville and a number of the Tukwila School District. And so the state's having to step in and essentially take over and make decisions and kind of overrule the school board on how to cut back on things to reduce the bleeding. And this is normally what you're going to be seeing a lot of in Washington State. I would expect probably close to a third of the school districts probably to hit some kind of wall like that, maybe more. And it's not always the school districts you think of. Bellevue normally wouldn't be top of that list. But what happened in the Bellevue School District is what's happened in a lot of them. They got a bunch of one-time COVID cash that came in. And of course, like the completely financially illiterate people they are, very similar to how illiterate the students are that are coming out of the machine, they just decided instead of using them for one-time money or set it as a reserve fund or doing something like that, of course not. They built up their budget as though that one-time cash would always be there. And then when it dropped off, nobody cut back at that time. And so, because it's too hard, right? You have to cut back and lay people off. Nobody likes that. The WA throws a fit, whatever the drama. At the same time, what was compounding that problem is you had a bunch of parents pull their kids out of the school district. And the reimbursement from the state to the schools is directly related to the number of students that attend those schools. So if you have 1,000 students going to a school, they get the state equivalent contribution for each student that attends. If that drops to 800, they only get the state equivalent contribution of the 800. And so a number of these schools simply hit the wall. Very predictable. They were warned. Every one of them knew it. They had bad, incompetent people in most cases running their finances, and they're lazy, or they are living in denial, and so they don't want to face the reality. The other problem, Marysville was a predictable school district because the reimbursement program, if you ever looked at their contracts in the past, and I worked with Jamie Lund at the Freedom Foundation, and we had actually reviewed all these contracts at school districts, and you could see and predict that the Marysville School District was going to go bankrupt. There was no financial potential outcome that they wouldn't. The only question is when. And it was really largely based on this super rich payment scheme that they had built up with the school, with the teachers' unions at a local level. And they can't technically pay them more than what the state approves for teacher pay. And so they build in the equivalent reimbursement cost that comes directly out of the taxpayers who live in that community. It's taxpayer dollars. They built it into TRI mostly, which is considered another benefit of like training programs, and you get paid for having that extra money. Sorry, I went off on a total tangent there. Let me get into some of these other questions because there's a lot of them right here. Jason Fisher again, and by the way, there might be some other people. I'll try to jump back and see what I'm missing. There's a bunch of questions coming in now. Any way to correlate to voters the climate change law to high gas prices? It seems to fly over their heads. Yeah, I would just keep repeating. The CCA, which is the Climate Commitment Act scam that's bulking up the price and creating this carbon markets garbage program. It's adding 40 cents plus to the gallon of gas that you're buying. It's the primary reason right now why it's not the only reason, but it's the primary reason why Washington State is the highest gas prices in the nation. You add that to the flat out, just the obvious sales tax that at least you see that at the pump, so you know that you're getting taxed that much. But that just simply artificially increases the cost of fuel. And the CCA is just going to have to go. California is discovering it now because we have clowns who run our state and they're so corrupt. they need to dig this money and kick it over to their friends. It's kind of part of the Green New scam. And so essentially, obviously, it turns things into where you're paying platinum prices for garbage government. And that's what our political leadership likes to do. The Democrats love it. But again, they're running out of other people's money, and this is where things are starting to hit the road here. Let's see, Jason, have you been following the clown show government in the UK? Been watching the Mike Graham TV show in the UK? I haven't been following that, but I mean, I've been aware of it, but it's just kind of funny. We have enough clowns in our own government. I haven't been looking overseas too much to find more. Question from Conservative. I can't believe that you were able to get that name with nobody else in competition for it. You're asking, what are they hiding? And I'm assuming you're you're asking that question about the Secretary of State and the voter rolls and why they're not providing the information. Well, the two specific things that they're hiding are the two columns in the voter Washington database for voters. One column has the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. They're probably also hiding the birth dates, which is, so I should really say 3 columns, because they used to provide birth dates to the public, and they don't anymore. So they're hiding birth dates. And then the third one they're also hiding is Washington State driver's license numbers. And so those 3 things are that's the data that Secretary of State Hobbs refuses to provide to the feds. Now, they used to provide birth dates to anybody who wanted to look at the voter rolls. They don't do that anymore. They blocked that after we started using it to cross-reference other databases, and we were identifying problems in the voter rolls, so they took that out, so you couldn't do that anymore. They did that about 3 years ago. And then the social number and the driver's license, you've never been able to get that as a citizen request in the past. They give it frequently, they give the same information to ERIC, which is the company that our state and 29 others use to supposedly clean up the voter rolls. But ERIC is an NGO run by leftists, and they don't have any interest in actually cleaning up anything. Whatever we're paying them is too much, and they clearly aren't getting the work. And here's the ridiculous thing. The state is legally obligated to provide this information to the feds. It's not like the feds aren't going to know what Social Security numbers are. And concealing that information from them is just a stupid exercise in trying to hide what's going on. So now the question is, what are they hiding? So that's the information they aren't providing them from Washington. What that means is the main thing that they're trying to conceal and cover up is how many non-U.S. citizens are on the voter rolls, broken into 2 categories. One's illegal aliens, which are basically people who shouldn't be here at all, and they got registered to vote because they were given driver's licenses and Apple Health and SNAP benefits and everything else, and one agency or another registered to vote, mostly through the Department of Licensing. You also then have legal non-U.S. citizens that are here, green card holders, H-1B, student visa holders, J visas, other things. Now, these tend to be usually better people who have resources, and they are here legally, but in order to be a productive member of society, they also get a driver's license so they can drive around, which is legal and understandable and a rational policy. However, what the Department of Licensing does is it registers every one of them I've been able to find so far to vote. So they register them to vote against their will, sometimes against their knowledge. Even if they tell them, I can't register to vote because I'm not a U.S. citizen, the Department of Licensing people don't care. They register them to vote anyway. And so those 2 categories, the Homeland Security is going to be able to identify that right off the bat. So that's going to immediately reveal that everything the Secretary of State's been telling the public and the narrative that they've kicked out for a long time, it's a total lie. They haven't been actually vetting the people that they register to vote at all. But that's not all. That'll be what they start with. But then they're going to have to look at other things, multiple duplicate voters who are registered in multiple states at the same time. That's one of the reasons why they need that additional identifier information, because they're trying to make sure that you're going to get a lot of false positives in this process. So it's not an easy thing to track and identify who these other people are voting simultaneously in other states. But so you're going to want to identify that, multi-state voting. That is illegal even in Washington. And they're also going to want to try to identify the people that are fake UCAVA voters, overseas people that have nothing to do with the military or their dependents, or even be overseas, but they've registered as UCAVA voters with that claim, and nobody ever looks into who they really are. There's a lot of problems with how the law has been set up. They'll probably find a bunch of fake people there. People that have died and are still on the voter rolls, I don't actually think that's going to be a huge number. And by the way, the multi-state simultaneous voting, I don't think that's a huge number either. It could be hundreds, maybe thousands, but it's not going to be like tens of thousands. And same with the UCAVA could be quite large. That one I can't tell. We have an unusually high proportion of our state as UCAVA voters, and having gone out and doorbelled some of these homes before myself with volunteers around the state, we find that a lot of them just flat out don't exist. They were never in the military. The houses have nothing to do with them and never have. They aren't dependents of the military. They're just somebody's getting ballots somewhere and voting in their name. And then we're also going to hopefully be able to dig deeper into people who have died. There's more to life after death than just voting in Washington State. I don't actually think that number's super big, but it'll be something. And then the real problem, additionally, is just going to be this inactive voter abuse, which I think we've uncovered in Snohomish County. If you watch my video on that story, I think that's a big problem. Sometimes people call it ghost voters, but usually they were legitimate voters who moved away long ago, or they're just no longer there. And so they've been used as a proxy for a pool of potentially, nobody's going to ever challenge it, so you can pull them out of the woodwork, process those ballots, nobody's the wiser. The other thing, and this is a direct problem with the Department of Licensing, they also double and triple and quadruple register people to vote. So people will change their maiden name and get registered to vote accidentally, even against their will, even if they try to explain what's going on to the Department of Licensing, they still get registered to vote under both names. Or, as many people have showed me with their ballots lately, they'll go in and get a new driver's license and they register to vote again under just a slight variation of the old name. And that's why when you're looking up the voter rolls, sometimes you'll see one house with 3, 4, 5, 10 different names there, slight variations in the same name, they're all registered to vote. That's an example of what I think the feds will be able to find, and that's what they're covering up, and that's not what they want the world to see, because it violates the narrative that Secretary of State Hobbs and Stuart Holmes, who's head of elections there, and the previous Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, and Nick Brown, the AG, and Bob Ferguson, who was the AG, and the head of the Department of Licensing, they all want to pretend that everything's hunky-dory, and we have a miracle, magical, special, beautiful thing that there's no way to commit any fraud or deceive anybody with it, and all the evidence points to the opposite of that. The real question is just how much, where does it really go? Like, what size are we really talking about? And would it be significant enough that it could convince somebody in the federal level of government, mainly in Congress, to actually reform mail-in voting so they don't have it anymore? We'll have to see. Let's see. Sorry, there's a bunch of questions that people had, and I realized suddenly I'm getting off and missing a bunch of it. Yes, I got that point. Lancelot Dufresne. Yes, nothing is transparent and everything's spin. That is true. Again, the guy with the long name here, Sean the Artist. Is that law regarding having to Washington State be financially responsible for counties and lesser jurisdictions unique to Washington? California wasn't responsible for Stockton bankruptcy. I don't know. Washington's constitution is substantially different than California's. So I've never really compared it. I always thought California did end up having to foot the bill for Stockton's bankruptcy, but you also had the city of Bell, California. I think a number of them actually ran into this. And sometimes, too, they have risk pools, insurance risk pools that might be involved in that. So I just don't know. It's a good question. I don't have a total answer to that. There's a question here. Thank you for using @We the Govern, because it's easier to find your question, from Summer Shield with an explanation point. Can we get a class action lawsuit against this climate tax in Washington State and take it to Supreme Court? It's unconstitutional and it's a scam. Yes, but when you say Supreme Court, it's going to have to be against, in the federal court, there is nothing, there's no level of corruption that the Washington State Supreme Court won't endorse and support. They're thoroughly corrupted, all of them, to the core. We have no good judges in the Supreme Court and Washington State Supreme Court, and so you'd have to take it federally, and the answer to that is yes. If we did clean up some of our voting rules, one of the highest priorities should be to vote in new judges. At least we can do that in our state. And anybody currently who's been appointed by Ferguson or Gregoire or Inslee is a terrible person and shouldn't be on the bench anywhere. Let's see. Lancelot Dufresne. Imagine Washington books being open. 2-hour money spending. Well, imagine that. It should be. And if you dig into it, you're going to find all kinds of things coming out there. Let's see. Keep going down here. Other questions. Not comments, but questions. Sorry, there's a lot of stuff here now as I'm sweeping through this. Let's see. Most of these are comments back and forth, so without any other questions, what time am I looking at? Yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap this up. I've been going for about an hour, and that's usually long enough for the attention span. I do realize that I'm getting more viewers all the time, but I think at this point in time, we'll wrap it up for this live stream. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to kind of post up like I normally would. the questions in the body of the screen. Normally I'd be able to point to them, and I just like that better because you know what question I'm answering, even if I've gone off on a tangent. But I do encourage you, if you live near any of these events and you do want to meet with me, use that as an opportunity to come by and say hi, or come to one of these DOGE Washington training classes. They're relatively inexpensive, and most of them I think people find fruitful, and it's usually fairly easy for you afterwards if you want to have a longer conversation with me about specifics and other things. If you are a whistleblower, and I know a number of you do watch these live streams, do make a point of reaching out to me if you think you have something. Try not to be so vague so that I can at least understand better what type of issue you're looking at, or I should be prepared to look at. I've got a lot of whistleblower meetings coming up with a lot of people around the state in following up to some of the videos and stories I've done. And as always, I'm going to protect your identity, but I do need to know the truth about what's actually going on, and more importantly, the people do. Hopefully I can be effective at communicating what those problems are, and I plan on running a few videos over the next 2-3 weeks that are a direct result of some of these whistleblowers coming through just in a recent batch of people around the state. So with that, guys, thank you for watching. Sorry for the kind of changing of the process on the live stream, and hopefully I'll get back to something that's a little more consistent with what I was doing before. I'm anticipating trying to do this next Tuesday. That's kind of my plan right now. But I got a lot of videos to get processed, filmed, and edited and launched before then. So, as I always say with all my videos, the future belongs to those who show up. Thank you for showing up today. Hopefully I answered your question. And again, get involved and engaged out there. If there's one thing I think the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk shows, is that there's absolutely no reason for any of us to not do the best we can to try to make a difference where we live in our community. And we aren't going to be Charlie Kirks. All of us, we're going to be finding different ways to reach out and make an impact. And we really should do that. We have to do that. We owe that, I think, to future generations. Had our parents and grandparents actually showed up and done something good and stopped a lot of this in the past, we wouldn't be where we are today. But woulda, coulda, shoulda, we are where we are right now. And so the burden of solving this falls on our shoulders, and it's a worthy fight to have, and it's worth saving our state. It's worth saving our communities like it is worth saving our country. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments section down below. If you really don't like this format or you have other suggestions, always happy to listen to them. Have a good day.